Site one.
Okay, so we already have this.
Town of Paonia, can you hear me?
And,
Yeah.
yep.
Thank you.
Hey, Kathy.
Hey.
Hello.
Pretend it's not there. All right, well, it is 7:30 and it's going, so I was.
7:30.
According to the clock, it is. It is 7:30, no, it's 5:30, we're gonna get going. So I'm gonna call this work session to order. Can we have a roll call, please?
Mayor Bachman.
Here.
Mayor Pro Tem Knudsen. Here. Trustee McInnes. Here. Trustee Smith.
Here.
Trustee Stelter. Here. Trustee Schwartz, virtual.
Present.
Trustee Valentine. Here.
All right, thank you very much.
Also have Commissioner Clisette.
Oh, yes, I'm sorry. You have to keep going. Go.
Hudson.
Here.
And Secretary Howell.
Here. All right, thank you, everyone. So we shall get started. We're gonna just hand it over to Shay. She's gonna run our little program here. Go, Shay.
All right. Well, hopefully we'll have like the mass entering in like another 5 or 10 minutes. We'll see. But thank you guys for being here tonight. Thanks for having me. A couple new faces, so I'll go over some of the stuff that we went over last time, but try to make it quick and brief, and we will get into a discussion. So I'm Shay Coburn, part of Urban Rural Continuum, who we were hired last spring to do a housing needs assessment and housing action plan for the town. I should test. Woohoo. Thanks, Ruby. I'm going to do a quick presentation, and then we're going to have lots of time for input and conversation, and then be able to kind of quickly cover next steps. So really similar format to last time. The quick background, like I said, we did a housing needs assessment and housing action plan. It was completed in November of 2023. That is on the town's website in case you haven't seen it or want to check it out, read it again, dig in depth. We are kind of finishing out this project with integrating this housing document into the comprehensive plan. So that will kind of be separate from what we're doing tonight, which is working on the short-term rental and accessory dwelling unit regulations. So we're having 3 different meetings. We had one on March 19th. So thanks for all of you guys that were there at that work session. We're having one today, and then we will hopefully at the end of the meeting today talk about the next meeting and make that plan for the next meeting, or roughly make a plan and set the details later. This topic could go on forever, so it's something you guys could talk about for forever until you are comfortable with it if you want. My goal is to hopefully get us somewhere where you guys are all comfortable and it's being considered for adoption or really close. If time allows, and if there's more time on the contract that I had, we might jump into talking about an expedited review process in small dwelling units. There's a couple of items that the town kind of committed to doing as part of this grant received from DOLA to do this project. So we'll dig into those if there is time to do that. Why we're talking about short-term rentals and ADUs. So for those of you who haven't read the housing action plan, these are the top 2 actions to start now. They were pretty clear from almost every community member of, we need to do something about this. Now, we don't all agree on exactly what those details should be, but that's what we're here to talk about today, try to get closer to refining that. But we are kind of past talking about if we want to regulate short-term rentals and if we want to allow for ADUs, but we're having that discussion of how, what are the details. These 2 items are also relatively easy for a community to address. So if you've read that housing action plan, there's a lot of items in there that are a lot more complex. They require partnerships with other agencies. They maybe require a lot of money. They require something that is a lot more complicated than having a community discussion and adopting an ordinance. Not that this is not a complicated topic by any means, but it's something really the town can do. There was so much desire by the community to make some sort of difference, take some action. People really feel like this affordable housing issue is like a crisis and we need to do something about it. And these were those items that felt like, hey, if we do something, this will start to make a difference. There is no silver bullet to solve affordable housing. That's just not a thing. There's different little steps you can do, little actions you can take to help with affordable housing, but it's really just, it's not like a solvable issue with one item. So again, these 2 items were identified as, hey, this is something we could control, we could do this, we could start to make a little bit of an impact here and make a difference. These regulations, setting them earlier is always better. So if anybody is trying to plan on maybe building an ADU or thinking about it, or thinking about buying property or selling property, or just thinking about their future, it's also nice to have regulations in place for people's planning purposes. So a few things to keep in mind, just as we have this discussion, we added some recurring themes into the housing action plan. Those were kind of the items that just kind of kept coming up in every discussion, but they weren't necessarily like an action item. So I'm not going to go over them in a ton of detail, but I will read them just for anybody who's new. There was a large priority to benefit locals before benefiting out of town people. Maintaining the town's character felt really important for the community. Using this water moratorium as an opportunity to get regulations in place while there's this hold on a lot of, new taps or all new taps. But get those rules in place and sort out what it is that you want so that when that lifts, when you guys figure out what those next steps are, there's rules in place and you're not scrambling to sort that out. Also that the town's capacity is limited. It's small. There's a small staff. There's only so much a town of so many people can do and want to pay taxes to do. So keeping that in mind and trying to keep things, simple, clear, easy to implement. And then generally, as I've said, community members really wanted action. People want to see something happening. So again, we can talk about it forever. You guys can talk about it for as long as you want to talk about it. I'm hopeful we can try to get somewhere, take that first step. Codes, ordinances feel like they're written in stone, but you can always go back and change them. It takes process. You have to follow the required steps to do that, but you can change them. And that is something you can revisit and should. Codes should be living documents and they should adjust to new realities, right? When most of our zoning codes were written in the 70s, we didn't know what short-term rentals were. They weren't a thing. Now they are, and they're impacting our communities in different ways. So we need to be able to modify and change our ordinances and our codes as we go. And then also this is focused on affordable housing. So there's a lot of other goals of the community, a lot of other things that our town board and planning commission want to achieve. But my role, at least through this project, was to focus on affordable housing and trying to improve that situation throughout town. I was thinking about this as I was looking at everyone's comments and going back through my notes from the last meeting. It's really hard because not all of these goals work together, right? So you can say you're focusing on locals, but then it's not simple or easy. You can, they're just at odds with each other. And I don't know how you guys feel, but when we get to this implementation piece, it might be helpful to share. I kind of felt like the most important one is trying to keep the regulations clear and enforceable. We had a lot of input during our housing needs assessment and action plan that, the town has not consistently enforced rules and implemented rules, and interpretations have changed and people feel like that's been unfair. And you really set up the town to fail if you make things too complicated. And it's a really vicious cycle. So the community can come in and say, we want this and do this and regulate that and that and that. And then you don't have a staff or support a staff that can actually do that. You don't have enough staff. They don't have enough hours. They don't have the tools, the education, whatever it is. And then they can't do it. And then the citizens get upset that it's not being done right. And that's a really bad position, I think, for everyone to be in, for the citizens, for the staff, for you guys as town board members and planning commission members to hear that. So that was kind of my takeaway was I think to me, that's what I've been focusing on as the top priority on my list. But please do think about that. And when we get to this input section, you might be able to share what your kind of top goal is or what your focus is. All right, so the general goal for this work session tonight, I sent out a second draft of the regulations. Did everybody get those? Get a chance to read them? Maybe. I know you guys got them because you got them directly in your email inbox. Folks of the public, did you guys see those? Have a chance to look? Okay, some yeses, some no's. Okay, well, I'm going to give you an overview, so you shouldn't be too far behind, but just let me know. We can, pause and go over stuff if we're needed. The idea here is that I've refined those rules, those proposed regulations from the last meeting, given all of the input, and we're going to go over those tonight and try to refine them even further. I tried to write this up because at the end of the day, creating land use regulations, you just can't please everyone. So we need to come up with rules that we can all live with. If we want to please everybody, we'll get nowhere. We're wasting our time. We should just stop now, go have dinner or something. But like, let's try to get to somewhere where we feel okay, we feel comfortable, we feel like it's going to do something and we can revisit it later, bring up an issue later. Again, it's just so hard to please everybody and to achieve everything all at once. Last work session, there were a number of you here. It was really thoughtful. We got a lot of really good input, but you guys even heard things didn't agree, right? People had different ideas, different opinions. People feel different ways, and that's okay. That's what we're here to discuss. But the idea is to try to reconcile, pick what's most important, what we have to sort out, what we can live with. One of those examples, there were quite a few comments about things that could benefit locals and focusing on that local priority. A lot of those get really complicated for enforcement issues. So you'll see where I've made changes or where I did not make changes. That goes back to me saying, I felt like I prioritized keeping it simple and clear for the town to enforce and regulate so that it can start off good and solid. And if you guys need to adjust, you can adjust. I did try to address all of the comments. So you'll notice in the document where I noted, like, I did not change this, or I received 2 comments about this. I didn't do anything. I wanted everybody to feel heard. Like I did consider all of those comments. But I tried to really keep in mind all of those kind of things to keep in mind, slide and everything else, and try to balance everything. So what we're going to do tonight is I'm going to go over the 2 topics. So the short-term rentals and the ADUs. I'll first do an overview of just the regulations as proposed this draft. And then the next slide will be what changed and what didn't change. So that way, people who were not here for the last conversation can kind of just get an overview of what it looks like. And then those who were, hopefully I'll follow up and touch on the things that we heard and didn't hear. I did bring some pens and blank paper. I was hopeful that we will do the same as we did last time. I'll kind of try to get through it. And you guys write, if you want to, use a pen and paper to write your notes or thoughts on your computer. You're very prepared. If you want to. Write your notes and your thoughts so you can come back to those. I'm kind of hoping we can focus on what we want changed. So what will be helpful for me, I think, is thinking about the items you do not agree with. So either how you would propose to change those, or I don't like this, I want it to be something else, or I just don't like it for whatever reason. Not that I want to focus on the negative, but I think it's helpful to make sure that I know then what to change and what we need to modify for the next version. Let's see. So, and then after this meeting, I'll be making one more revision for you all to consider. If we have time, if everything goes smooth, we might be able to do it again, but we'll see how much time there is left. Does that all make sense, you guys? Anybody need to grab a pen and paper? I can deliver. Good? Okay. Okay, so short-term rental regulations. So the proposal that was sent out is that the short-term rentals would be defined as the rental of all or a portion of a dwelling unit for 30 days or less. It would exclude hotels, motels, lodging facilities, boarding or rooming houses, and bed and breakfasts, which are defined in the code, but I did not include that here. They're not defined in the code. It would require a license. So if you're doing a short-term rental, any listing would require a license, and that cap would be at 20. The license would be non-transferable. So like if you sell a house that you're using as a short-term rental, you couldn't sell it with the license. A new owner would need to reapply for that license, and it would be valid for 1 year. The short-term rentals would be allowed in any zoning district, but it would need to be a dwelling unit. So any dwelling unit in any zoning district that's within the town of Paonia, except it would not be allowed in accessory dwelling units or in deed restricted housing. I don't think you guys actually have any deed restricted housing yet. Maybe your senior, the senior housing, I think I'm forgetting the name of it.
Yeah.
That has a deed. Thank you. That has a deed restriction on it. It might expire soon, but like that couldn't be used as a short-term rental. The parking requirements in place today would apply. So like today, if you have a single family house, you need to provide 2 parking spaces. That would remain the same. Again, short-term rentals would need to be a dwelling unit or be within a dwelling unit. So not a barn, a garage, a tent, but a dwelling unit or a part of a dwelling unit. And then meet some basic safety measures like having smoke and carbon monoxide detectors, fire extinguishers, adequate trash, and clearly posted address that is good for EMS, right, Rick? And then the last item is that the owner of the short-term rental or an agent they hire would reside or conduct business within 15 miles of town. So somewhere nearby. Okay, and then the summary of changes. So these are changes from the last draft. These are not changes from your current code, just for anybody who wasn't participating or wasn't here last meeting. So I did reduce the cap from 30 to 20. That there were quite a few comments of we should reduce that cap. 30 felt like too much. So that was reduced. The license I had proposed to be valid for 2 years. It's now valid for 1 year. I did add that definition of hotel, motel, or lodging facility. Thanks whoever threw that out there. That was a really good technical catch. And then I restricted ADUs from being allowed to be short-term rented. There were a handful of comments desiring that. The things I did not change, generally it was because there were only 1 or 2, maybe 3 comments about that. So it didn't feel like it, for lack of better words, like get enough votes to necessitate a change. Or maybe given other items, it was kind of conflicting or they didn't really align with some of those major things to keep in mind. Those major principles. So there were some other minor edits that I'm not going to talk about, but I did try to note them just so you guys could see what's changing and keep track. We had a couple of comments about not wanting to regulate portions of dwelling units that are rented. So that means like if someone wants to rent 1 bedroom or 2 bedrooms of their home, there was some desire to say that doesn't count. We should not count that towards our cap, or we shouldn't regulate that at all. That it gets really complicated for enforcement. So that's an easy workaround for people. An example or 2 of that. In order, people will create like a master suite, which is almost like an accessory dwelling unit, but maybe it doesn't have like a stove or an oven. And it functions almost like a full dwelling unit. And then they'll say, oh, well, that's only 1 room in my house, so it doesn't count. And you can end up with a lot of those in town. You can also have like a 1 or 2 bedroom unit house that someone says, oh, I only want to rent 1 bedroom, because when they leave, or they say that they're renting 1 bedroom and that they're there, but they conveniently lock their bedroom door and happen to be out of town every short-term rental or something like that. It's kind of a funky thing, and it's really hard to draw a clean line of what you regulate and what you don't. And to me, in my experience, the cleanest line is just saying any portion that you are renting out as a short-term rental should count. So I did not change that. I also didn't change, I think we got a comment on the number of like rooms in one house. I think there was one comment about that. It didn't seem like it's a major issue we need to address at this point, so I didn't add any regulations about that. It's also kind of hard to fairly enforce, because if one person gets to rent 1 bedroom for a license, or one person gets to rent a whole house for a license, that gets a little funky to enforce and feels a little unfair. I also didn't change the number of licenses per person or the licensing methodology. I think in administering these rules, the staff has a little bit of flexibility to kind of decide how they want to administer the rules. So that could be something that is, discussed later, but doesn't necessarily need, we don't need to establish in the code how like the first licenses will be issued. That's more of an administrative procedure. And I kind of want you guys to have some flexibility in that and have a little leeway. I also did not add the neighbor notification or a requirement for a public hearing. I feel like we were hearing, we don't want more process. We don't want to have more time or more uncertainty. And if someone can or can't do their short-term rental, I think there was only one comment on that, so I did not change that. And then again, I didn't address the short-term rental tax at this time. That's a big, complicated topic and should really be handled after short-term rental regulations are in place. You guys are a statutory town, which means your taxing authority is somewhat limited. I am not a taxing expert. So doing that can be something that you do as a follow-up, kind of step 2 to once you get short-term rental regulations in. The state, I had mentioned this last meeting too, the state is working on some legislation that might require that all short-term rentals across the state are taxed as commercial property and not residential property. So that may take care of the issue. That may kind of suffice for that desire to tax them a bit more. Okay, accessory dwelling units. So accessory dwelling units would be defined as a dwelling unit located on the same lot as a principal dwelling unit that's clearly incidental to and subordinate to the principal dwelling unit. It could be freestanding, attached, or within a principal dwelling unit. So this is really about density. It's not about the use, but adding a dwelling unit to certain lots. It would have to be a full dwelling unit. So again, yes, this whole master suite thing or lock off, or people call it different things, could be a way around it. It's a really hard thing to not have a workaround to. It's just the way that it goes. People find workarounds there. But it is supposed to be a full dwelling unit. One would be allowed for every detached single-family home in all districts. 800 square feet floor area maximum. It would have to comply with the adopted building codes and kind of your dimensional standards. So your height, your setback, everything that would apply to build a house on that lot would apply to your accessory dwelling unit. There would be one extra off-street parking space required, in addition to what's required for your principal dwelling unit. The design would have to complement the principal dwelling unit. The ADU could be built on a lot before the principal dwelling unit. That generally allows people to kind of build a very small house on a lot that meets these standards. Today, it's the 800 square feet. It has certain characteristics, and then they could build a main house later on or never build a main house, but sell the property and someone else could do that. It's a way that people can generally sometimes afford to build a property and then get a lot out of their property when they sell it. And then utilizing the ADU would need to utilize the same physical water and sewer tap to the main line, but pay a 3/4 inch tap fee, which is the same as every single family house, unless you're building a gigantic house that needs something larger. And then have a separate water meter that's already required in your code. Every separate dwelling unit needs a separate meter and to pay your monthly fees. So keep in mind that while you'd be legalizing the building of accessory dwelling units, this generally happens very slowly. I think, Steve, you mentioned it last time, like they're expensive to build. Not everybody can just turn around and build an accessory dwelling unit. So it would probably happen very slowly over time. A quick summary of the changes from the previous version, so the version from the last meeting. I did modify some of the landscape open space requirements. So this was tricky, and I made a bunch of edits and kept changing them because I wasn't liking them. What I landed on was that I changed, currently your code has a requirement for a landscaped open space. Well, it turns out the code also defines landscape area, but it defines it for subdivisions and it doesn't define it for this purpose. So I changed it to landscape area and defined that term. So every lot would have a required landscape area, which basically means a landscape open space.
Can I ask what page are we on right now? You're kind of going through and I'm getting lost. Oh, okay. I mean, you're not going through the ordinance?
No.
Not in order. Yeah, sorry. But I'm at your dimensional standards. So where your setbacks and stuff are in your code, there's a table, so that might help you find it. The idea is that we would then add a minimum landscape area of 25% in the R1 district. So right now, there's no minimum landscape open space for R1. The discussion that I thought I heard at the last meeting was there was just a concern of having too much lot coverage. That if you add a house and an ADU and maybe some accessory structures that, you build out a whole site and there'd be no landscaping, no open space, no trees, it would feel like a lot. I did some quick calculations for examples, and it didn't seem necessary to me to add a maximum area, a lot area coverage, because between your required landscape area and your setbacks, you would have a decent amount of open space. So like on a 6,000 square foot lot, which is your minimum lot size for a house in most of your districts, the established setbacks as are today already take up 44% of your lot. So you would never be able to cover more than that, because you'd have to leave those setbacks open. There are a few caveats to that, with accessory buildings now being allowed to be a little closer to your side setbacks and stuff. So you'd be covered by having your setbacks and a landscape area that's open. I also calculated on a 12,000 square foot lot, so twice that, your setbacks would still take up 32% of the lot, and that's just the setbacks alone. I removed, so last proposal had removed the section on requirements for accessory buildings. It kind of felt unnecessary, but I undeleted that, so it stays as is in the code today. But I did remove one sentence in there that wasn't necessary. It references a maximum lot coverage, which doesn't exist in your code, so it's a odd requirement. I think maybe it was a wording error or something, but that is just confusing and should be clarified. And then I added accessory dwelling units under that section. So it was a kind of rearrange of numbering, which doesn't really matter to you guys. I removed the owner occupancy requirement. So if you'll remember in the last version, the discussion was about having an owner of the property either occupy the main house or the accessory dwelling unit. That's gone. And restricted accessory dwelling units from being short-term rentals. There were a number of comments on that. And then clarified the water and sewer service section. It was fairly clear that most people wanted to require a full tap payment for an accessory dwelling unit, so that would be required. And you guys could always revisit that later if you get through all the water tap, all the water moratorium stuff, and decide that you want to really incentivize ADUs. You could reduce that rate if you wanted. So again, I made some minor edits for clarity. Those are noted in the document. I won't talk about them. There were a couple comments about requiring ADUs to be done by special review, so not allowed by right, but have to go to the Planning Commission and Board of Trustees for review. I did not add that in. That would act to kind of disincentivize ADUs. And I think with wanting affordable housing, we want to try to incentivize them. Special review adds uncertainty for people. It adds time and cost for people. So that's just kind of at odds with what we want. If there are certain concerns about specific topics like lot coverage that came up or other topics that you guys are thinking of, the best practice is to really try to address those in our regulations, so that it's covered and everything's addressed that we're super concerned about, and we don't have to go to special review and have a planning commission look at it and, figure out what should or shouldn't be allowed. The parking requirement, I think I had one comment about removing parking requirements, that one extra for ADUs. There are a lot of communities in Colorado, and even the model land use code for Colorado is going to say, don't put parking requirements, none, you don't need them, which is wild. That's a big change for a lot of communities. I feel like what I had generally heard is that's an impact on neighbors, and there was a concern for that in this community. So I didn't remove that. I kept that in there, but would be curious on all of this stuff to know what you guys think. The tricky thing with parking, some of these things I say, well, you can add that later if it becomes an issue. With parking, if all of a sudden you get, 5 ADUs applications in and you permit them and you don't require parking, you can't go back and require that they add parking. But you can go back and remove that rule from your code if it's really feeling too strict. So that's a little tricky, or you try it, and if it does become a problem, then, oh, well, you have 5 ADUs that don't require a parking spot, and, that you deal with it. The other thing I think we talked a lot about was, what about existing ADUs? Can we do like an amnesty program? How do we grandfather them in? We want to keep them. We don't want to keep them. This one was interesting. So I think first we need to determine what our rules are and if we're going to create a lot of non-conforming ADUs that way. So if you guys have a lot of ADUs that were built lawfully at that time, and now we're making rules to which they wouldn't meet these rules, then you might want to consider figuring out how to do this and do an amnesty program or sort out the non-conforming. But as of today, as of this draft, what happens is that all new accessory dwelling units would need to meet the new rules. If they were permitted and legally built at the time that they were built, they can continue. They become a legally non-conforming use. These are existing rules in your code. You have legally non-conforming uses. There are some limitations on how they may be able to expand or be altered, but they can continue until certain things happen. And then maybe they can't continue, or they need to be brought into conformance. So maybe they need to provide that parking space or something like that. If they were built illegally at the time, they remain illegal. They weren't checked for health safety. They didn't meet your building codes. They didn't meet your rules at that time. That stays in place. They remain illegal. There are some communities, I know Durango was mentioned last time, they were kind of the poster child for this at the time. They did this whole program because they had so many illegal accessory units in their community, mostly because of all the college kids living in them, that they had a real, they were in a pickle. They could not say, too bad, you guys are all illegal, you have to come up to code. They'd have a bunch of homeless college kids and other people around. That's a tough position for them. I feel like you guys are a little bit more ahead of the curve getting these regulations in place where you don't have a insane problem of illegal ADUs and a bunch of college kids living in unsafe, inhabitable situations, but they may still exist. So I think that's something that once we determine what the rules are, we can maybe think about, do we need to do anything different than what the code says today? So I did copy I put back the non-conforming section in your code in what I sent out, just so you guys had it for reference. But we could revisit that. Also, it's something that you guys could kind of decide to do separately. Once you adopt rules, you could create an amnesty program. You could create an incentive for people to get theirs inspected and bring it up to code and, make sure it's safe and a good place for someone to live and not an unhealthy, like, we just threw a bed in the garage and plumbed in a sink and we call it a house. And then the last item on that was that I did not modify the part about design to complement the principal dwelling unit. It's kind of intentionally left subjective. The idea there is that leaves you guys with flexibility. So if the community really wants things to match, then you get to say complement means really match, like similar materials, similar roof pitch. If you want to say complement, it's pretty loose and like it's not just totally like you plop a shipping container unit that's been converted in an old, beautiful Victorian house backyard. You might not be able to do that. But generally, this is one of those community character concerns that people have that's like, we kind of want it to like somewhat blend in and not be totally different and funky, but County is kind of funky, so maybe you guys would want that. Okay, so this is where I stop talking and you guys start talking. I feel like the last work session worked pretty well, kind of going around the room one by one and talking about what you want to change. So what we did last time, there wasn't back and forth, but we just gave everybody their couple of minutes to address what they were, basically their input. What I really like to focus on what edits you propose. So the things you disagree with are helpful for me to know. And we'll go with the public first, go with the planning commission and board next. And if you don't want to talk, no problem, just say skip. No big deal. We will be taking comments in writing. So if you're someone who wants to process and give comments later, that's no problem either. Ruben, who do we have on the line? I know we have Kathy and Stefan. Do we have any other public?
Second one.
Okay. Okay, so if you guys could all help me remember not to skip the people online. It's
Why
sometimes
don't we
hard to do that.
start with him?
Okay, we could.
And we won't skip.
Okay, that's helpful. So a few things to keep in mind before we get going. The focus on what you want changed. If you kind of don't mention things, I'll assume you're kind of indifferent or don't really care about those items. There's a lot of people, so be as brief as you can, and please do respect the time limit. I am supposed to be your code person, so don't feel like you need to wordsmith or get too fancy, but tell me what you're looking for, what you want. And then I'm just going to keep notes and address items at the end. But if you do have a direct question, I'll do my best to try to answer that as quickly and succinctly as possible. I think that's it. Shall we go with Lori? What's it? Yeah. Thank you, Dave.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. So one of the things that I'd like you to, we're talking about edits and changes or proposed for the second draft. I find a lot of issues with, is that a fact that we're saying that there's 30 STRs right now in the town of Paonia?
You know, that number is very hard to get. That was a pretty thorough count we did when we did the housing needs assessment, probably last summer. So it may be a little bit out of date, but I don't know that there's an exact.
Somewhere around there. I think that's fairly accurate. But so I'd like to propose that we would not drop that from 30 to 20. And one, I think one thing that I have a question about too is like, what's the time frame here? Are you thinking about implementing something like this here in this season? That would be a problem for many people. Many of the places many of the STRs are booked out through October. So that would, that could put a really negative impact, not only for the hosts and the co-hosts and the owners of the STRs, but for those that have planned ahead. And then, it's, I just still, I know the goal is to create more housing options that are affordable. I still say that, affordable, are we talking about living wages, affordable for basic living wages in Paonia? I know our 2-bedroom, 1-bath house just downtown Paonia, our utilities are over $400 or, almost $450. So it's difficult to, long gone are the days of $900 for rent. And so, and a lot of our, people that bought houses bought it at peak market. And so there's mortgage payments, there's this type, those types of things that, that's going to be difficult to, or that's hard to believe that by limiting or capping or eliminating, that's going to really push and move a needle there for affordable housing. And then I just want to, one more second, just as far as the economic benefit of STR visitors, and, no, I'm going to move ahead of here. Just the job impacts, I'm going to just give you one quick little example of, there's a botanical gardens, Denver Botanical Gardens. One of the instructors at the, I don't know if she's at the school there, but rented one of my units. She's holding a workshop. They booked 10 rooms at the Bras Hotel. They hired Chef Joe to do a farm to table. We've got 4 to 5 girls cleaning. We've got lawn mowers. Today and tomorrow, I've got Chris, what's his name? He's washing the windows. I mean, there's a lot of jobs that are impacted by eliminating and capping these STRs. And I just feel like that's I don't know, I just don't agree with it. And I don't think it's really in line with other communities and other counties where.
Your time is up.
Okay, that's fine.
All right, thank you.
Thank you.
All right, since I have screwed up the timer.
Did you get it started or do you want me to get like my phone out or something?
I can get my phone out and you can do it that way.
Okay.
I'm sorry.
No worries, I heard you beeping over there. I wasn't sure. I'm happy to help with the timer too, Mary. Just let me know.
Pardon?
Just let me know if you want help with the timer.
I can do it.
Okay.
Just said it.
Oh,
Okay,
great. Who is next online? So we don't forget about you. Kathy?
Do you want me to go when the trustees, after the trustees, and keep it to public?
Sure, as long as you remind us and don't let us skip you.
I won't, but thank you.
Okay. Stefan?
Stefan Lynn, 713 Front Street. Administrator cap is off, resident hat is on. I do want to see two things. One, a fee. I want to make sure that that stays in, any sort of edits that goes on for administering these for short-term rentals. And two, I think it is appropriate that even if it's a bedroom inside of a home, that it also must receive a license. It's going to be the easiest way to administer it. That's all I've got.
okay, thank you.
Awesome. Well, I think we started over here last time, so maybe we'll start with you if you are wanting to share.
You want me to stand up there?
That'd be helpful.
Okay.
If you're up for it, thank you.
Can you hear me? My name is Deborah Spiegel. I live on Orchard Avenue. And so if the purpose is to create more affordable housing, I don't understand how getting rid of my rental in my bedroom and basement is gonna help, because I'm not gonna rent it long-term to anybody. And I mean, I didn't, before COVID especially, I rented during the season, which is just now gonna start. And people come from the BMW rally or something, they need a place to stay. And they're only there for the night, they don't use my kitchen. I like that. If I had a long-term, like, full-time, I had a full-time tenant there, it wouldn't work for me. So it wouldn't solve the problem at all to get rid of my renting the room in my house. I don't understand it, and I don't agree with it. The other houses that are like the whole house, there's tons of them on the street. The whole house is rented out for short-term rental. That I understand getting a license. But inside the house that I live in, I don't get it.
Thank you. Up right behind her. Okay.
David Merrick. I live at 55 Pan American. I also own a rental house in town. I would reiterate what Lori said about dropping the limit from 30 to 20 to immediately eliminate 10 STRs. I don't see how that's going to have an immediate negative impact. The jobs will be lost, the income from sales tax with the visitors that come and whatnot. And I've read that housing needs assessment. I don't see where eliminating or restricting STRs is going to somehow create affordable housing. It just doesn't seem to add up in there at all. It's a problem with, supply, demand, and those things. There were 10 people that stood up at the last meeting and said they thought we should cap it at 20. And I agree with Lori on the other point. Most of these STRs are booked out through October. So if you take 30 and eliminate 10 of them right now, that's going to create a little bit of chaos for the market. So if whatever you do here, maybe put it at the end of the season, give people a chance to adjust. So the timing of the ordinance is pretty important. I just don't see the benefit to doing that, to limiting them right now. I think if you leave it at 30, you can see how things play out if people actually get licenses. Do we even get to 30? People may choose not to do that. The other issues are kind of technical revocation of the license. it says a holder of a license, short-term license, is in violation of the town code. I mean, that's pretty broad. Any code violation, I don't see. Maybe that's not what the intent is. It also allows the administrator to revoke the license prior to a hearing. If I have an STR and I've got bookings and my license gets revoked and I request a hearing, I've got to cancel all my reservations and wait for a hearing before I can come back in business. Those are minor issues, but I think they should be addressed for sure. Thank you.
Up across the aisle. Okay, I'm gonna talk fast. Okay. I wrote a letter. I have 2 houses in Paonia, and I've been doing this for 12 years. When I started, I came to the town, I talked to the town, no problem. And then I went through all of the procedures. I got a license from the state. In fact, today I did it. And quarterly, I pay my taxes. You know, somehow I feel like this is a little unfair because I've really done what I was supposed to do. And in renting our home, our large home, full-time, I found that, well, my property is taken care of a lot better than it was when I was full-time renting because I take care of it. And I think that's something to take into consideration. Also, there is an economic plus in the short-term rentals in that we bring in business. I mean, I wanted to point out too, my property, I rent various ways, short-term, sometimes long-term, sometimes my family uses it. It's not just short-term, so I don't know exactly how that works into this picture. And the regulations, you know, I'm not quite sure what is trying to be done here. Should long-term rentals be regulated too? I'm, you know, signed up with Airbnb, and they, you know, there are certain things we have to meet with Airbnb. And so I have some regulations there. And, you know, when I'm considered a super host, you probably are too. And that just means that my guests are very pleased with the care of my property. And so I think that needs to be taken into consideration. I am confused, as has been stated, how is discouraging short-term rentals going to improve the housing? Okay, let's say I turn one of my houses back into full-time.
You've got 30 seconds.
30 seconds, okay. Can I rent it for the amount that people are wanting to rent it? Am I supposed to reduce my rent in order to meet this need? So, you know, I'm just not quite sure how this regulation is going to help the problem of housing. Thank you. Thank you.
I think 2 things are pushing this movement. One is the United Nations. This is their official guidelines and goals that they published decades ago, and they continue to work towards socialism. And that's the more the government gets involved in providing everything for people, that's socialism. It's robbing from the workers and giving to those who are on welfare. Now, I know welfare is important in some instances, but not to the extent that it's being pushed. Paonia used to have 3 doctors. They used to have the electronics store. They had an independent insurance agent. They had a meat market. They had a barber shop. They had 3 physicians. The high school is gone and those teachers, the minors are gone. Those are all high-paying jobs. And Paonia has replaced them with nonprofit workers. We now have bead makers. We have circus performers who teach pole dancing. We have coffee shops. We have yoga instructors. We have magic workers. We have all kinds of psychedelic encouragement and enticement. We have Buddhist instructors. So I think it's been created, this crisis. And this crisis is across the nation. It's the same terminology. I travel a lot and I see it. There's empty houses, there's empty buildings everywhere, from St. Louis to Wisconsin to, there's empty buildings that could be used. And what obligation do we have to someone who decides to make beads for a living, who decides to teach pole dancing, to move anywhere they want and expect the citizen of that community to support them? What if I want to move to the Hamptons? Is somebody in the taxpayer community going to pay for me? Another thing, that back to the United Nations, the very term urban rural continuum, they're trying to destroy the rural areas. They're trying to make everything a city, everything.
You have 30 seconds left.
Okay. I think it's a slap in the face for the short-term rentals to our motels that have been here. Redwood Arms has been here over 20 years. She's done a fine job. We stayed there before we became residents here. And the design complement, what if it costs $10,000 to make it complimentary? That's shooting yourself in the foot, because then it's no longer affordable. Okay, I think my comments are up. Thank you.
Do you want to speak? Yes.
Yes. Yeah, sure. Yeah, so Bill Brenner. Yeah, so there's obviously a lot of thought gone into this. And I don't want to diminish that at all. But just to kind of go down my list in no particular order. From my experience with creating ordinances and things like that, I think this definitely needs an attorney review. There's attempts at language in here that sort of makes sense, but when you get down to arguing about what exactly does that mean, I think I thought for a long time, it's a mistake to pass any ordinance without having an attorney, knowledgeable attorney review it. One of the things that bothers me about this is that this makes major edits to the entire set of codes that we've been trying to live with for a long time here. And it does it from a single viewpoint that these changes in housing are the most important thing right now. And I think there's been some haste in this. I think we got into it kind of hastily because this was, I thought, done because there was some grant money that wasn't used, so we could use it to do this. It wasn't the project. This is popped up because there was some extra money. So in that sense, it's chasing grants, which I think is a bad way to set your priorities. As far as fixing things later, tell me when that has happened. You know, I mean, we're on the verge of a major code rewrite. I think it would be a huge mistake to add something like this in now, just before a major code revision. I mean, and this sets up several conflicts, I think, that would have to be addressed. For one, it talks about the tap fee for the ADUs, but you have to change the water ordinance. That's where the tap fees come in. So you could change this, and you still don't have a legal way to do it. And you know, this proposes ADUs in all zones. Well, I live in L1. And I'm not even allowed to have a house there. So, you know, there's got to be some, you know, things have to happen in order.
You have 30 seconds left.
I'm on the verge of stepping into the role as a trustee. And from my viewpoint, I don't think we should have any new ordinances until we fix the ones that we've already got. And I think this should definitely apply to all users of Paonia water in town and out. People out of town are obligated to live by the water ordinance. And it would be horrible to tie the hands of people in Paonia. Well, we don't even talk about what's going on
Okay,
around
your
town.
time is up.
And there's at least as much ADU stuff out there as there is.
Thank you, Bill.
So what's the rush? You got to fix the moratorium first anyway. Thank you.
Do we want to start with Kathy? Has anybody else from the public logged on, Ruben?
Jennifer, hop on.
Jennifer, do you want to share your thoughts?
No, thanks. I'm just listening.
Okay, no problem. Thank you. Kathy, do you want to start?
Sure. So I have just a number of questions that perhaps they'll be able to get answered tonight, but I'll just put them out there. My first question is for staff is, what does this feel like from an implementation and enforcement? As you all go through this, does this seem reasonable? This is a minor part, but with the addition of the hotel, motel, lodging definition, does that include hostels? It seemed like it maybe was a little bit limited, so I'm just going to ask that question. I'm sure it does, but I want to make sure it does include hostels.
Yeah, it's intended to.
Pardon?
It is intended to include hostels.
Okay, thank you. I understand why you don't want to include the taxing part of it, but I would hope that because we have you as a resource, if we could even use some of your time to work with taxing experts to give town some options, that would just make it a bit easier for when we go to the next level, if that research has already been done. I think it would be important to include in there. That was my major disagreement. Yeah, and that's what I have for you for now. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Kathy. You want to start, Morgan?
Sure.
We'll go in a reverse order like we did here.
Yeah, so I think if we're kind of going in the order that we were talking about from your presentation, the two things that I have to say about STRs, I understand the want to not kind of add extra language on how licenses are distributed and how many each one gets. That said, I think it runs counter to the want of what we're doing to benefit the locals, plural, if we don't limit the amount of license that one person can hold. So I think the first meeting, there was some folks in the back that had 4 STRs, and that's a fifth of all of the STRs are held by one person. And so I think, if we're going to do this, we want to kind of spread that wealth as evenly as possible. I don't see the need to add extra taxes onto STRs because the way that I read the code is they are a functioning business and are paying the sales tax that a business would pay. And so we are actually recouping some of that tax revenue anyways. The ADU parking requirements, my read on the kind of elimination of parking requirements for ADU comes from communities that have public transit. So not everyone has to have a car. We don't have that. And so everyone who wants to get around has to get around by car or some other vehicle. So I think we need to maintain the amount of parking. I'm a little confused by the requirement of a tap fee for an ADU. Personally, I think that kind of muddies the water of what a tap fee is actually paying for, other than just paying for the privilege of using the water. And because there's already the requirement for an extra meter to be on that unit, I really would prefer not to just lump as many fees as we possibly can on this whole process. So as long as the fee is actually doing something constructive, that's great, like paying for administrative processes. But if it's just, hey, we can charge you more money, so we're going to, I think it's not the best policy to go by. And that's me.
Thank you.
I also kind of have a concern about changing the short-term rental from 30 to 20. Because what's existing, I think that was brought up quite adequately by several people in the audience. And if that was something that was decided to do, then it maybe you could do something like initially whoever is already there, eventually as they drop off, or if you could eventually bring it down to 20, but not dumping the 10 people that already have a short-term rental. So that was one of the things I had an issue with, and I think that's pretty much it.
I sort of echo that. I didn't see a mechanism for going from 30 to 20. Nothing in there about how we would do that. And that's actually potentially sort of a sticky problem. The other thing I was looking at, this might not be a big issue, but I think there are a couple of ADUs that were approved to be STRs in recent times, approved by a previous manager. And I guess it's a question, what would we do about that? Does that become some sort of legal question? Because these are specific examples. I think the moratorium was in effect when they were approved. It says if they were illegal, they remain illegal. But if they were approved, then what's the legal status there? So maybe not a code question, maybe a legal question. But I know those are, there are a couple of real examples of that. We'll have to deal with it. Thanks.
I just wanted to put out a couple 30,000 foot things here. And I think it's a misnomer to say that reducing short-term rentals is to create affordable housing necessarily. As I see it, based on the housing study, we have a lot of huge houses and people and single people, and not many small houses to accommodate a single person or a couple. So I believe part of the reason here is to potentially put more small buildings, houses available for people to do long-term rental, and not necessarily affordable, just make more of the market. Let's open up the market and make more of those units available for long-term. And then the other thing is, I have to agree with Bill Bruner that to me, we have too many things in our code that this overlaps with that have to get addressed before we would put this in here. Because for instance, we don't require a fee to put on a meter. So there is no income coming in from that second use that you would get from a tap. So all that needs to be fixed. And we have a request for proposal out right now to hire a firm to look at our land use code. So to me, this is a good time to work this up, get through some of these issues, and have a placeholder to be looked at when we redo the code. And then we may have to bring up some of these issues again, because I think the point has been good. There are STRs still already in operation that are booked out for the end of the year potentially. So we have to talk about maybe a phasing in period for this. And I have quite a few wordsmithing comments that I won't bring up here, but I will send them to you, Shay. Great. They're just, smaller things, because some changes being made here are being made to issues in our land use code that have been problematic. And for instance, an interpretation of the, what page is it on? Dwelling units part of a business use on page 20. Your interpretation is the opposite of how it's been interpreted. So just to point out, we have some pretty serious problems in our code that we can't just do this in a vacuum. Thank you.
All right. Set the timer for me. I have to agree with Morgan on the number of licenses per person. I think we really need to cap it and not just be whoever wants a license can get a license as long as they're in the queue before we get it going. I have some concerns about parking. We have some very narrow streets that it's really hard to get down when there are cars on both sides of the streets already. If somebody opens a short-term rental, maybe you with that, and has to require another parking place, where are they going to put the other cars? So I think I don't know that there's a good solution to that, except to continue to require the extra parking place off-street if they're going to put an ADU or a short-term rental on it. The other thing I have a question about, so it sounds like according to the code revisions that are proposed here, you cannot build an STR unless it is a dwelling unit. Is that correct?
So a couple clarifications. There's no building of an STR because an STR happens as a use within a dwelling unit. So it would be, you could build a house, you could build a multifamily apartment, you could build an ADU, and any of those could be used as a short-term rental. So maybe could you tweak your question based on that?
Okay.
And Paige, you're shaking your head no.
It says, I think is a portion, see, rental all or a portion of a dwelling.
Mhm.
Okay.
So like a bedroom,
But
that's the idea.
yeah, so if you wanted to build something on your property that you were going to use for a short-term rental, it would have to be a dwelling. So it would have to have the kitchen and the bathrooms and all of that.
Or be part of an existing dwelling unit.
Right.
So it could be like an expansion on your home, a big bedroom that you want to add on to rent out. But it needs, the idea of it being a dwelling unit is that it is certified by the building inspector as a residential use. It is made for residential occupancy. And that's for certain safety standards. It has, it meets egress requirements. Firemen can get in the windows, that kind of stuff.
Okay, all right. Okay, that's all I had.
Okay. One of the concerns I have is that because we have neighborhoods that are extremely crowded, parking is a very big deal. We have several streets that literally now they're parked bumper to bumper on the entire street. Now, if you add a short-term rental or an ADU on that, that adds to the burden of parking. There is no more parking. We also have at least 2 buildings that I know of that they took the 2-car garage and converted it into an ADU. And there is no longer parking because of that. That needs to be addressed as well. We also have health and safety. The biggest thing is health and safety. We can't have a unit that's rented that does not have carbon monoxide and smoke detectors in it. That's a state law. And as far as fees go, we need to collect sales tax on the short-term rentals and as well as possibly long-term rentals. We need to look at that. We need a way to afford to make affordable housing. And one of the ways is that we subsidize it by either lowering our tap fees or we have property that the town works with a public developer to develop affordable housing. That's what they're doing in Delta. They gave them a huge break on water and sewer tap fees, and they also own land. So the other thing is the reason we have tap fees is that's to use to build and maintain our system. And it's pretty important that we have some. Right now, we're running in the red, always. We're in the next 20 years, I don't see that we're not going to run in the red until we get the system up to a standard that it should have been and is not. So tap fees and expanding ADUs paying their fees for water, sewer, and trash, that'll help us out enormously. And we do have quite a few STRs right now. I think that if we're not going to get this done this year. We're not going to get this done this year. If we get this done by December, it'll be a minor miracle. So I anticipate that this will happen next year. And that's where I want to put it. We're not going to shut anybody down this year for sure. But you might want to plan about next year.
I'm the numbers guy. The
The 30 STRs that currently exist is in my understanding is about 1% of the total number of units in town. That's why I believe I read that in the initial. Changing from 30 to 20 is an insignificant change, just so you know. I've had a number of people talk to me about this after the last meeting who were pretty adamant about what's really driving this, which is, it's the cost of housing. Prices have gone up. It's pretty simple, and unfortunately, that's a challenge to deal with. Short of the town making a commitment, as well as having the ability to commit to support affordable housing, like other larger towns, which we are not, that makes it really difficult. I appreciate the passions regarding all of this. I don't want to sound inconsiderate or unempathetic for what's going on. And yet, I think it's really important for us to be very realistic about what it is that we're up against. As far as ADUs go, practically speaking, a lot of the stuff that we're talking about in terms of parking and all of this kind of stuff is going to be limited by the size of the lot. A lot of the lots that we have in town probably can't accommodate an ADU, let alone afford it if somebody bought late, right? They've already got, the way that you do that is I might be able to do it because I bought in early and I have a lot of value in my house. If I choose to capture that, I could maybe do it, right? But it's still going to cost a lot of money. And like I said the last time, the reality is how much is that really going to make? And what could I actually rent the place for and expect I would have to eat a portion of that to make it affordable for somebody else? I might be willing to do that personally, but not many people are. So, and I've heard a lot of people complain about ADUs, they're going to be all, I don't want this town to get packed full of stuff, of property, So that's my 2 cents.
Thank you. So it's kind of ironic because STRs kind of take our slum houses out of circulation and they allow people to fix them up and realize a profit from it to where they can invest it back into the property. And sure, it's going to make maybe a more expensive house to rent if it ever turns into a rental again. And it could very well. Just because something's an STR doesn't mean it's going to be that way forever. But it does really bring up properties. And it's something that we need in this town because there's a lot of rundown, termite-eaten stuff here. I live in a house like that. I don't have enough money to put a roof on. But if I knew that there was like a possibility because I could do something like this and recoup some of the costs, I would fix my property up this way. So I think I don't know about this limit. And now that we're talking about applying it to a single room in a house, is that going to go toward the 30 unit limit too? How can you tell single people who they can and can't rent to and how long they have to share their home for? I don't think that's right. I think that's kind of government overreach. If you're sharing your kitchen and your bathroom with someone, I think it's up to you. I don't think you should condemn people to having long-term housemates. I don't think that you should, page 33, remove renting of rooms. You said take it out of our code. I don't know, is it a home occupation? If they rent rooms, maybe it's not an STR, but maybe it's a home occupation. Maybe it needs to be looked at that way. If the state is considering STRs as commercial property, how do you do that for someone who rents just one bedroom? A single person who has a big house,
who wants to maybe help pay their taxes? Is it really a business? How long are these rentals in operation for? Are people doing it just as a very short-term thing themselves? Or are they doing it as a business? I don't think we've considered any of that. I'm kind of offended. It seems like there's an assumption that people want to cheat the system. So we have to over-regulate because people might cheat and game the system. I don't think that's fair. I'd like to trust people a little bit more.
You have 30 seconds left.
And then as far as the inspections, do we inspect long-term rentals? Do we inspect long-term rentals for smoke alarms? We didn't address anything about setbacks. Some communities have solar setbacks for height of buildings. I'd like to know what is the definition of clearly secondary? I think we need to put a percent of the size of the main house because if you remove the height
Time is up,
restriction.
Suzanne, your time is
Yeah,
up.
I know. Can I say one more thing? I really don't like this format because I would like to see more of a back and forth working with this. And I feel like I'm compressed into this tiny bit of comment period that we share with the public. And we're really not discussing this like a planning commission and a board should be discussing it. I think it's really unfair. Thanks.
Thank you. Anybody else joined online, Ruben, that we might be missing?
Kathy rejoined again, but that's it.
Okay, great. This is really helpful. And, there's never a perfect format for this stuff. So sorry if it's not working for you. I think the idea is there's a lot of people with a lot of thoughts on this, and it's really helpful to try to hear from everyone. Sometimes when you just open it up to like free discussion, certain people can kind of dominate the meeting, and other people who are quieter, don't want to stand up, don't get the chance to talk. So that's on me. It's how I chose to do this. But with that said, we do have a little bit of time, even though that clock says it's 8:40. It's 6:47. We have until 7:30, right?
I have no.
Okay, I had planned 5:30 to 7:30. So I'm going to address a few things, and then maybe we would have a little bit of time for extra discussion, or if if there's more questions or comments. I wanted to try to address a few items that came up if it's helpful to provide some context. Let's see, my notes aren't totally organized, so sorry if I jump around a little bit. On short-term rentals, so the idea is that you would still be able to rent a room. What is proposed today is not that you cannot rent a room. It's just that it would count towards that number of licenses. So maybe that goes into this discussion of, do we want 20? Do we want 25? Do we want 30? That's the proposal today. But the idea is you can still do that. The town is not saying you cannot, but you would need to get a license and follow some certain procedures for that. The whole idea of regulating short-term rentals is kind of a disincentive. I mean, the idea is that short-term rentals take out housing options for locals. This is proven across community, and yes, they all function slightly differently. So there's no way to say this is exactly what would happen right here in Paonia. But generally, if you have people who are renting on a short-term basis, that takes away from rentals, or potentially someone would sell and someone could own that house that would be a local person. So the idea of kind of adding these regulations means that, maybe someone would say, it's not worth the hassle to me. I don't want to get a license. Or, oh, it turns out what I'm doing is just renting out the barn anyway. And it's not actually a habitable space and it shouldn't be lived in. And now the town has a way to kind of regulate that and say, hey, that's really not a safe and good option for someone to live in. Generally, what I have seen in most communities is that hotels and lodging facilities like when communities put in short-term rental regulations. Short-term rentals compete with hotels and motels and hostels and lodging facilities. the customers that may go to a short-term rental, if it's maybe not available, maybe would stay at a hotel. I know different people have different preferences. I know I do. When I travel, some trips are really nice to have a place with a kitchen, or, where multiple families can kind of stay together in one space. I know it's a little bit different, but often hotels, motels, lodging facilities do actually appreciate kind of evening the playing field for them, because they are paying commercial taxes. They are doing things a lot differently than a short-term rental here in Camden would be doing today. The time frame in which this ordinance would be in effect would need to be determined. So that would be part of it. I think that's some good thoughts came up about, when would it be in effect? There would obviously have to be a process for it. It wouldn't, your ordinance is my guess. I don't know. You guys probably know better than me, but often they require a first reading and then another reading like a month later, and then they can be in effect another month later. So even for them to be in effect, and then also in an ordinance, you can set an effective date. So they don't necessarily have to be effective that month later, but you could say this is effective now, and the licensing period is to be, determined whenever. So that would be something that would be determined and decided as appropriate. And that's great to think about, many people who might already be booked up and not wanting to mess that up, because that's a real bummer for anyone who has plans on coming here or people who have plans on hosting people. I want to just get all the short-term rental things. I think maybe John, you mentioned something about a past administrator allowing for short-term rentals. Technically, you don't really have any short-term rental regulations, so I'm not sure that would, you'd be able to grandfather anybody in, because I'm not sure that's a defined use in your code right now. So whether the administrator just kind of said, yes, you may do that, or no, I mean, you can do it right now because there's no rules saying you can't. So I don't think we'd need to address that, but we could if we need to. Let's see, the garage, so on ADUs, a couple of things there. This would kind of take care of some of these garage conversions or barn conversions that, have been done probably under the radar. It's kind of helpful. So by saying, hey, if you're going to do a short-term rental, you need to have the parking that's required by the code. That means the person who has turned their garage into more living space or something like that, they'd have to find other parking spaces on that site to identify those. So it is almost a way sometimes to help with getting existing regulations to be complied with. We don't need to say how people are using their garage. It's fine to use them for storage and stuff. When a house is built, normally you need to show your parking spaces, but nobody's driving around saying, are you parking in your garage? That doesn't really matter. Yeah.
I do have one correction.
Yes.
There is a definition of short-term that isn't allowed it's in a definition section. So that's the only regulatory thing that we have for short-term rentals. It's in a definition.
Yeah.
That needs to change.
Yeah, and that is proposed to change for sure. That the whole definition of dwelling unit needs to change. I think I mentioned it last time. It's really bad practice in a code to put regulations in a definition. They get lost. Nobody goes through and reads the definition until you have to read a definition. So that would change for sure. The town attorney would definitely review this. I'm assuming the town attorney requires review of all ordinances. That's general practice. So that is flagged for something when it gets closer to being finessed. I don't want to waste, I'm sure you guys pay the town attorney hourly. So we try to do the best we can to get, as close as we can. And definitely a good point. Absolutely needs town attorney review to make sure everything is legal and good. The code update. So I actually just read that request for proposals, and my understanding of that is you're not actually doing a land use code update. You are doing a municipal code update. So your entire municipal code to be reorganized do a full legal review and reconcile items. There's a specific sentence in that RFP that says we are not anticipating changes, like actual major changes to our code. So again, you guys do what you want. This is just a contract job that I'm doing. I really want to help you guys get where you want to be. But this is your community. You guys get to make that decision. It would be a missed opportunity because this will not be in that RFP. That is not part of that proposed project. Let's see. We are not, I should say you, as the town of Paonia are not able to regulate land uses outside of your jurisdiction. So you can work on an agreement with Delta County, which you guys have and are working on updating, I believe. And you could have that discussion to regulate through an intergovernmental agreement. But the town of Paonia does not necessarily have land use controls outside of their town boundaries without the coordination of Delta County and having Delta County on board for that. I think we kind of clarified, Rick, I think it was you who maybe clarified the tap fees or system investment fees. So those are generally charged as hey, we have to keep building and improving our system and maintaining our system. Use fees, I would say, are generally the cost to produce the water. So the actual treatment, the staff that is there, the testing that has to go to the state regularly, those are your monthly fees, is the cost of actually delivering that water to your system and taking your sewage away and treating it. But as far as the whole system improvement, that's what your tap fees are for. And it is, you guys are in a tricky situation where you really need to collect those because you need money to be improving your system and expanding, adjusting, all the things that you guys need to do. But that is a nice way to help incentivize when you get to that point, or if you get to that point. Codes are left for interpretation, but in 13-130I, there's a provision.
Can you say the page number of the packet, please?
It is not in the packet. It's in your municipal code. And I can look it up if we need to, but and Stefan's probably read it 300 times, so come out here if you have some stuff. I read it as the applicant needs to pay for the meter as well. It requires the cost of the tap and everything to be like the cost of putting in the tap and getting water service to be on the applicant or developer. I forget the term that's used. So yes, you guys would need to adjust that if that's not, if that's not how that's been interpreted or used.
Did you say the citation again?
13-130I. And yes, this is codes are, I love them. There's something wrong with me. They're fascinating and they do everything interconnects, right? Like I hear what you guys are saying on this affects something else and this affects something else. I am trying very hard to catch all of that stuff and make sure to know where, hey, you got to list this. I have seen it as best practice sometimes in certain instances to list things twice. So I thought about just leaving you guys a note of, you're going to need to update your code if you decide to do the tap fees to also update it there. We'll do that. I'll have that for you guys if there's other sections in your code that you need to update or we need to actually include in an ordinance. Right now, what we're doing is getting the gist together, getting the language together. The ordinance is where we actually put all the whereas statements, all the things that need to be cleaned up. And I am a code person. I've been doing it for quite a long time. Not that I will get it perfect. If you see things, please let me know. But I really am trying to pay attention to all of that stuff and make sure that things are cross-referenced properly and your terms are defined. And yes, it is hard to work in a code that is old and needs a lot of love. But I think, I feel like if I was your staff, I would be saying, I hate code updates, especially before a large code update when you're going to clean everything up. But there are some Band-Aids that are appropriate to do. And what I have heard through our housing project is please do something. Please, please do something, and make us feel like the town cares about affordable housing or wants to do something. Not that all the comments about, hey, do we really need to do this? Not that those are not valid by any means. But just want to share that, you know, coming from my perspective and all that I've heard and gathered from here, that is what I've been hearing. So we have like 30 minutes left. Mayor, may look to you. Do you want to kind of open up for follow-up questions or discussion? I need probably 5 or 10 minutes just at the very end to talk about next steps. And I want us to decide on if we want to have another work session or if we want to have a draft ordinance. But otherwise, that means we have like 20 minutes open. So maybe I'll look for your guidance on what you.
Let's go ahead and do follow-up.
Okay.
And again, we don't want one person to dominate the conversation. So I think maybe a 5-minute limit. So people have, so that gives 4 people, that only gives 4 people the opportunity.
Okay. So if you don't need your 5 minutes,
yeah,
share them with others and we can try to get to more.
Yeah.
Okay. Do you want to do any particular order, like public or just the board? And
no, why don't we start with the public and see if anybody on the public has updates and then we can.
Okay. Any more comments do you want to do online first to make sure we don't forget them? We still have a couple of folks online.
You have Jennifer and Lori.
And Stephanie. Jennifer, Lori, anything that you want to share or follow up on?
I'll just, I'd like to just clarify one thing. This is Lori. I just wanted to clarify that I host as an owner one Airbnb, and then as in your document, you know, or the ordinance that you're talking about, I act as an agent for these other homes. So it isn't like I have 4 homes and I'm, you know, doing that. I just wanted to clarify that.
Thanks. Jennifer, anything you want to address? Hearing nothing, anything from the public? Yeah.
Just real quick. It's something I missed before. And as far as putting all this stuff into the comprehensive plan, the housing assessment and plan and all that, I think that's getting way too specific for a master plan. I think this is supposed to be a broad framework to work within, so that's too specific. Again, I don't see why you want to expedite this. And I think that as far as the way the codes are written, that's not that there's no regulation of STRs. The first thing the code says, or one of the things the code says, if it's not specifically permitted, it's prohibited. So, you know, it's a small sentence, but it's a big meaning in that code as far as what's conforming, what's not. And I believe that through the water ordinance, people out of town are bound by the town's water ordinance. And if the town's water ordinance deals with extra dwelling units, I believe the people out of town are probably going to be bound by that. And it's very unfair to in-town people, if there is a way to regulate out of town as well, it'd be very unfair to only regulate in town.
I didn't hear your last sentence. I didn't hear your last sentence.
That would be my last statement.
Yeah.
It would be unfair to regulate in town without regulating out of town. Be unfair to people in town.
Anybody else in the public? Any follow-up, additional thoughts?
I just, you know, we have said that housing is a crisis, but you know, it's that way all over the nation. And hopefully the inflation, our economy will see a change. And we'll see that change too here in the county. I was wondering about the license. We've not discussed how much this is going to be. And also, if a party that has short-term rentals, if they pay the license for a year if they have an inspection and they pass, they've done everything they should, does that mean they have to continue getting a license year after year? And if that's the case, is that money really, what is that money doing if they don't need to be inspected every year? Anyway.
Okay. Stephen has a hand.
Yes, Stephen, thank you.
So I do have a couple of things. One, I know there was discussion about, regulating bedrooms. What we're talking about isn't like a long-term bedroom, renting of a bedroom or sharing of a house situation. We're talking short-term, we're like you're operating your house as an inn, right? Like an innkeeper. And so that's why I'm saying when my comment was made earlier, to include that in the licensure or the licensure requirements, that's what I mean. It's for this meeting the definition of short-term rental, even if it's a bedroom. If it's long-term, we're talking 5-6 months, a month, whatever it is, that doesn't meet that definition, and we're not trying to regulate that. Then my second thing is, I was very, very specific in the RFP for our code. I do include, a section that says the land use sections are contradictory, do not always conform to land use law, and have resulted in poor interpretation. In 2018, the land use code was mistakenly integrated in the building code and will need to be separated. So, and I did hold a pre-proposal meeting, and there were questions about that. So I want to put everybody's mind at ease. I did include it in the RFP, so I promise it's there. But I will add, I will add to that. As far as getting, ripping a Band-Aid off and regulating some of these things, I think that this is one of those situations where we don't really have a section of code that regulates both accessory dwelling units well and short-term rentals. And I think this is one that we can add in with at least easily integrate it while we're going through this other process. And, the articles may change, but the chapter is going to be the same. It's going to be in chapter 16, our zoning ordinance, but the article may change. And that's something we can address during the code rewrite section as well.
Yes. Okay, so that just brings up some of my questions, like how does regulating would I choose to rent out a room for a night to somebody that's, how does that help? And I know there's young adults living together and co-housing cost of rent is so high these days. Are they gonna be inspected to see if they have fire detectors and carbon monoxide detectors as well? And I'm not worried because I have them. I'm not worried about being inspected. I just don't understand why if I only rent for a night or a week here and there for the 3 months in the summer. So it's not like I'm like a bed and breakfast and we had this discussion in here years ago where people were putting how many guests come to town for events, and there's not enough rooms at the hotel. So we need options. So that needs to be taken into consideration too. And I feel like I need to just shut down now because I'm being overcontrolled and I can't even decide what I'm doing with my own house, inside my house. So I'm a little frustrated. But I guess I have opposite opinion of this book.
Thank you. Let's come up here. I just have a clarifying question. I thought you said, or I thought I read that a new ADU could not become an STR.
Correct.
Okay, that's why I was shaking my head, is because when you and Mary were talking, you were making it sound like it could be an STR. So I just want to clarify
You're
that.
right, that was a
The way this is
recent change.
proposed. So
And
even if
any ADU, even existing.
Yeah, so, okay, and so if you built an apartment on the second floor of your house as an ADU, you cannot have a short-term rental.
That is
with
what's,
some sort of beginning date some sort of beginning date of some sort of effective date. Thank you. Okay.
thank you for clarifying
Steve?
I'd like to go back to what Shay said the last time before we started into this section, which was there was this desperate kind of, within the community, this desperate concern about affordable housing. And we had to come up with something. To some degree, what we're going through is almost a imaginary idea that this might work, but we don't really know for sure. We don't. You know, the reality is it is what it is. To some degree, what we have as STRs and whatever ADUs there are already here. Okay, have they made a difference? Really? And is what we're aiming towards with all of this regulation? I'm not saying yay or nay. I'm tending to go towards, let's consider some rational understanding of what the process is, what's really going on, and is this really going to take care of it? Okay, so I mean, kind of just want to put that out there since we're in the discussion phase, and anybody can respond however they want. So,
Suzanne?
So it's kind of, we're saying that it's gonna be really expensive and not many people are gonna build these anyway. So how does that solve the housing problem? I think we don't wanna ruin our quality of life here. Lot coverage, height restrictions, losing your backyard privacy to something that's looming next door. We really need to look at what this is gonna look like. Setbacks, solar setbacks. What happens if you're on that north slope and someone builds and shades your backyard? We really need to be sensitive to how far things get set back, where that peak of the roof will be. I was looking at some other communities, they happened to, I guess they might have been in Washington State and Oregon, but they're very specific about the size of the lot coverage percentage, or they compare it to the percent coverage compared to the percent coverage of the house. You know, when they want to make it clearly secondary, and there's a formula for that. And I think formulas are good because it makes, there's no ambiguity there. I saw one community, they actually had pre-approved house plans for an ADU. I don't know how you do that. And that fast tracked it. It took out a huge chunk of expense that you'd have to spend toward planning. Maybe people can do whatever they want, but you can offer. We've got plan A, plan B, and plan C. You know, maybe they're sized different ways, but you know, the town could come up with something like that and make it a lot less expensive for property owners to put something in. So that was just, it needs to be looked at a little bit more carefully. I'm just kind of glossing it over a bit, but.
Sure.
Yes, Stefan, thank you.
Well, okay, there we go. So I do have two questions, Shay, that may need to be delved into a little bit more. The first, we kind of heard it a little bit earlier. It was, is there a mechanism for adjusting the amount of available licenses, like annually? Maybe it's quarterly on the first year of implementation, and then annually. I don't know. Is that something that's ever been done before? And then number two, is there a way to incentivize long-term rentals to help with or some people that might have short-term rentals now, if there's some way to incentivize them to turn them or convert them into long-term rentals to assist with this housing, shortage? Is there a way to, incorporate that into this ordinance? That's all my comments.
Others?
I would like to just reinforce what the gentleman said. I don't know your name, you're on the planning committee apparently, but if it hasn't worked to date, why does anyone think it's gonna work in the future? Isn't that the point you made?
Well, more importantly, to some degree, yes. But are we looking at the problem in an accurate way? In other words,
are we gonna, by adding all of this stuff, is it really gonna make a difference? Right, because currently we have what we have. What are the ADUs that are out there, the STRs that are already there? They're not making a difference. One, we assume, or the assumption it has been that because they're here, right, specifically STRs, but because they're here, that's the real problem. And that, I'm not 100% sure of that. You know, again, it comes back to the reality of what's really driving the problem is housing values. It's gone up everywhere on the planet. It's not just here, you know, and that has an impact because anybody who wants to rent a piece of property, they're probably not going to rent it at a loss, right? They want to make their mortgage be covered. That's what it's about. I'm happy to rent my house as long as I don't have to pay the mortgage and let somebody else do it. Well, mortgages have gone up through the roof because the values have gone up. So have the taxes. You know, it's across the board. It's not just, you know, that somehow we're going to flood the market with all of these houses these ADUs that we want to build, and all of a sudden it's going to suppress the market. I'm not sure that that's going to occur. I'm just saying, look at it realistically, is really what I'm saying. And it doesn't mean I'm not a supporter of affordable housing. You know, if that's not it. I just want to take a practical look at what's really going on, and what we're planning to do, is that going to fix it?
So I will maybe just address a few things. Stephan, I'm sorry.
I just want to, one of the things I believe when the whole housing study started was the concern that if we did have ADUs coming in, they'd become more STRs. And so, you know, that was addressed in this change. And I don't remember the discussion being, you know, what already existed, but is it going to be more? Are there going to be more and more STRs and less available housing for people? So I think that really was the concern that started this.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yep. Kathy has her hand raised.
Sorry?
Kathy has her hand raised.
Kathy. Kathy?
Hey, Kathy, you're gonna have to unmute your phone. There you go.
There you go. Okay.
Sorry, it was connected to my computer. I'm having some, okay, anyhow, regardless, what I appreciate about the housing study is that you really are not saying that it's one thing that's going to solve this issue, but it's a really multifaceted approach. And yes, I agree, this isn't going to have a huge impact, but I think it's a really great place to start. And we have to try multiple approaches. Shay, I really appreciated your comments of perhaps we increase the number of licenses to 30 to include people who are renting out one room. Where I was at the last meeting was I thought, we really shouldn't regulate the one room, but I think we have to. We have to make it a fair playing field for everyone. And so I actually am in favor of increasing to 30 licenses, but in having that include people who just rent out a room in their house. And then finally, we had talked about like our or out of town water companies. And some time ago, I was the secretary treasurer of one of the very few water companies who had an agreement with town. And in it, it said that you aren't allowed to have an ADU, or you weren't allowed to have an ADU. And the question that I had always wondered is, how does town enforce that? And so that, I think, as we look at redoing our agreements with our water companies, that's going to be a big deal. Like, how can we enforce it? I mean, how do we help regulate it? I know that's off topic a little bit, but it's also connected. So those are my comments. Thank you.
Thank you.
Why do people move here if they can't afford to live here? Housing is much cheaper in many other places. And with today's flexibilities of the job market, they can work in many places. My daughter is in Tucson right now. And the area where she lives, the houses there are like $100,000 cheaper. And in Wisconsin, they're cheaper too. They're cheaper many places. Paonia is an expensive housing place. So how can they come here and expect the community to pay for them?
So I think I'll try one more comment and we'll try to wrap it up.
We're conflating housing cost with ADUs and STRs. And the only way we can ever make housing more affordable is we build starter houses. And starter houses are like 800 to 1,000 square feet, 1 to 2 bedroom, just like we have on Rio Grande. That was starter housing. It was company housing at one time, I think. And people move in there, they stay there 5 years, build a little equity, sell it, move on. And that's probably the only way we're going to build any kind of affordable housing in this community. And perhaps zoning is the way to do that. I don't know, but it's something to discuss with the community. And I strongly suggest that that's the kind of, we encourage that kind of construction. Now, again, with land costs, it's a problem, you know? The only lot in town that I know is for sale is $85,000, no water, no sewer. So it's $100,000 before you even turn a shovel. So we have to figure a way to make that happen.
Right, so it's 9:21, or it's 7:21.
Yeah,
So we're gonna turn it over to Shay. We're gonna cut out the comment. And just
Thank you.
let Shay wrap.
So thanks, Kathy, for bringing that up. I think, this is really hard. There is not an answer to affordable housing. Are ADUs and short-term rentals the answer? Absolutely not. They are something that you can do. And what I can tell you is through our project and our public participation, your community generally believes that they will help immensely. Some sort of regulation and some sort of allowing of ADUs. So what it will also help is just knowing that town is doing something. Also, as a town, there are even more limited options for you guys to help with affordable housing, right? Like in the whole housing toolbox, there's a lot of stuff that can be done. Of what the town can actually do, it shrinks. There's options, but there's only so much. And this is something that has been proven to help in a lot of communities. This isn't coming out of nowhere. Urban Rural Continuum, it's me and my husband, but he's been doing housing studies for lots of years in lots of different communities. So it's informed. We did hire us to do that housing needs assessment, housing action plan, which is a really in-depth look at your housing situation. I don't know that you guys will ever get more in depth on that until you choose to update that again. I appreciate, wanting to look at it, wanting to really get it right, and wanting to think about it. So that's great. But just know, you have a lot of information at this point, kind of more than you'll probably ever have. A couple of clarifications. Dwelling units do get inspected when they are built. Every dwelling unit should be inspected when it's built for things like fire alarms, egress, all of that stuff. They are not typically re-inspected unless there are issues or questions. Just so, that is helpful. The comp plan work is basically putting in some cross-references. We're not like restating all the detail in the action plan and the comp plan. That seemed like it's not worth it. You have a proper plan to reference, just making sure it gets referenced well and that the housing action plan will be an element of your comp plan. Let's see, I think there were a couple other clarifications. I probably didn't quite get everything, like the pre-approved ADU plans, definitely something you guys could do, not part of something that needs to be in a code. But communities are doing that. It's a great way to help incentivize housing. Stefan's questions, he had asked about a way to incentivize long-term rentals. And what I have found is the way to incentivize long-terms is to disincentivize short-terms. So you add a licensing requirement, you add some extra regulations on there, and it just so happens that maybe a handful of people say, hey, it's not worth it, or I don't meet the rules. I'm going to sell the house, or I'm going to rent it differently, or I'm going to do something differently. You could, when we get to talking about fees, we could charge a single bedroom rental license. less if that indeed would be less to administer that kind of license. Perhaps the inspection would be, take less time. The enforcement might end up taking less time because like, if you're actually there, there's probably less calls of, hey, somebody has trash all over my yard. Hey, somebody's parking in my driveway. So if you guys feel that we could justify that it actually will take less to administer, that's something you could do to try to just level the playing field for those single bedroom rentals. And I'm sure there's a lot of other stuff to talk about, but we only have so much time every day. So what I do want you guys to know, we can take written comments. I'll take written comments for another week. So if you guys think of things after the meeting or have follow-up thoughts that we didn't get to, email me. My email's on the screen, or email Paonia at town@paonia.com and they'll get it to me. You can also drop something off at town hall if that's easier for you. And I will be making another adjustment to the codes and we'll be talking about it again. Board, Planning Commission, how are you guys feeling? Do we want to have another work session format? Do you guys feel like you're ready to look at an ordinance? Want me to share my thoughts?
Well, take a straw vote. How many people feel that after another round of edits, we want to do another workshop?
We have a new board coming on and a new planning commission.
Right.
So it's kind of a funny transitional time here.
Yes.
Might get some new input.
So you would go for a work session?
Yeah, after the new board's seated.
Okay.
When is the new board seated?
23rd.
Code. I'm gonna look at some code.
Ready for an ordinance? Is that what you're saying? You're ready for an ordinance?
All right, well, yes.
I think that in the next meeting, we ought to be ready to start doing some at least markups for a code, that we actually get it started, because it needs to go to the lawyer. And it probably should go through a public process too.
It has to.
Yeah.
Well, no, before we enact it, yes. But I mean, before we actually get it to the lawyer, let's make sure that the public has some input.
So it sounds like another work session.
Yeah, me too.
Okay, well, it sounds like we want to set another workshop.
Okay.
Okay.
And after the 23rd.
When's the new planning commission gonna be seated? Will it be still the old one or?
It's still going to be the mayor and then the board. The old planning commission until.
Well, their terms are up.
Okay. Well, I will work with the staff to get another work session on the calendar. Keep in mind, the benefit of doing a work session is we can be a bit more open when you get to an ordinance. It's a public hearing, so it's stand up, you have your minutes and we're done. We can't kind of do this back and forth anymore. So that's great. We can do that. I'll do my best to incorporate some of these comments. Do send follow-ups if you have follow-ups, and we'll see you guys soon.
Good. Thank you.
Thanks very much.
Thank you everyone for coming and for giving us your opinions.